Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Thoughtful Bros. So excited to be back after a couple weeks off. We are live streaming as usual on A Mighty Blaze. We are here every week, usually at 2 o'clock on Tuesday to talk about what makes great books tick and what makes great authors tick. And another reason why we're here, it's because I believe that books change people's lives. And there is probably no book in the history of the world that has changed more lives than the book we are going to talk about today. So it's totally on message for us here at the Thoughtful Bro. A few things before we get started. Just a little bit about A Mighty Blaze for those who may be first timers coming to the show today. We're an all-volunteer initiative to help writers reach readers virtually in the time of COVID and then also beyond COVID. You can find scores and scores, literally hundreds of interviews of ours that we've done in the past year during the pandemic. Interviews with folks like George Saunders, Anne Lamott, Jonathan Lethem, John Irving, Edwidge Dandycat, Erica Jong, Cheryl Strayed. The list just goes on and on. We've had Pulitzer Prize winners, National Book Award winners, and just bestsellers and debut authors, frankly, of all kinds. At A Mighty Blaze, we're not asking for anybody's money. If you really want to support us or show the love, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. That's really, honestly, the best thing you can do for us. Just go and click follow or subscribe on any of our social media accounts. You can also subscribe to our weekly podcast, where once a week we take the best of our interviews and pop that up on the podcast. You can subscribe to our weekly newsletter on amightyblaze.com. We don't do any advertising. This is just a newsletter that tells people what's going on that week. There's lots of other shows on A Mighty Blaze besides The Thoughtful Bro. And as I said, all of it is 100% free to you guys. If you do feel like just the urge to spend some money and buy 4 or 5 books, I would recommend buying an excellent book called The Gospel. It's translated by Sarah Ruden. We're going to put some links to buy that book in the chat. So please go ahead. It is an amazing read, as you're about to find out in this interview. If you have questions that you want to ask Sarah, please just pop them in the chat and they will make their way to me. And one final teaser for next week, it's sort of an interesting pairing this week with Sarah. Next week, we have the National Book Award winning author James Carroll, whose new memoir is called The Truth at the Heart of the Lie, How the Catholic Church Lost Its Soul, in which Carroll, who's a writer for The Atlantic, as well as a National Book Award winner, he's kind of wrestling to reconcile his faith with all the scandals in the church. So that book's been getting lots and lots of interesting press and should be a very interesting interview. But now, on to our fabulous guest this week. Sarah Ruden was educated at the University of Michigan, Harvard, and Johns Hopkins. She's translated several books of ancient literature, among them Virgil's Aeneid and Augustine's Confessions. She's the author of Paul Among the People, The Apostle Reinterpreted and Reimagined in His Own Time, as well as The Face of Water, a translator on beauty and meaning in the Bible. Sarah's the past recipient of the Guggenheim and Whiting Awards. She used to be a scholar in residence at Yale Divinity School and is currently a visiting researcher at the University of Pennsylvania. She has just released this amazing, provocative, fresh, fascinating translation of the Gospels, which I read in the last few days. The Christian Science Monitor said in a review, quote, "Rudin's rhetoric throughout is sharp, bright, and compulsively readable. Rudin is never less than interesting, and one of her obvious goals to transform these most familiar of ancient texts into fresh reading experiences is reached on every page." And then Publishers Weekly said, "This audacious translation is essential reading for anyone who thinks they already know the Gospels." So high praise. And Sarah, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Thoughtful Bro.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is really a lovely opportunity. I'm so happy to be here.
Excellent. So, folks, before we dig in here, just a few things about how we're going to run the show. That I just want to set up the show a little bit today. So first of all, the Thoughtful Bro is obviously it's for a lay audience. This is not an academic show. This is not a spiritual show. This is a show for people who love books. And so I think, like, just Sarah and I talked about this ahead of time, but the best way I think on this show to approach this work is as I approach other works on this show. I mean, we talk about language, we talk about genre, we talk about character, we talk about tone. And a thing with the book, or the books like the Gospels, is, I mean, these are probably the most talked about books in the history of the world, and everybody has an opinion, and you need a way into the material. So the way into the material for us in the next 45 minutes is going to be talking about it, like we would talk about another translation. We're going to approach it like a work of literature. So that's going to be our approach. And then just one last thing is, during the end, I'm going to read a few passages from the translation itself, and then we're going to talk about them. So that's sort of how the show is going to go. Sarah, does that sound good to you?
That sounds great.
Awesome. All right. So Sarah, I've talked enough. Why don't you step in now and just tell us what this work is?
Well, I think the best way to background this is to foreground it. When I talk about what happened this spring, I sent a copy to my mother, who, of course, hasn't been able to go to church for the entire year. She's a devout, lifelong Methodist, and she, on Easter Sunday, she read the Passion in the book of Mark. That is the story of Jesus's death, and then on to his resurrection. And she was really excited in talking about this to me. She said, it's a story. It's a story. I can read it straight through, and it just makes sense to me. From one scene to the other, she can see it, and she can understand how it felt. And she's never had that experience with a translation before, and she's felt very frustrated about what is, in fact, the normal use of an English translation of the Bible, and that's you take little pieces out of it and you use it in church. You cut it up and present it in small pieces in church. She's not happy with that. She wants the story, and that was what I was intending to deliver. And I was when I've succeeded with her, I know I've succeeded.
That's so wonderful. And it's so accurate. I mean, that was my reaction as well, reading the work, is that, I was raised Christian. I went to, Christian school my whole life. And I just sort of, you're so used to reading these passages, and some of them we'll get into later. We'll read them aloud. Some of the most famous, iconic scenes in the Bible. And it's just, you've heard them so many times in the exact same language. And reading your translation, it's just so disorienting in the absolute best sense of that word. And you're like, oh, this feels just fresh and new. And just by changing a few words, it returns a kind of edginess to the work, and it hits you at a new angle. I just thought it was great reading.
Yeah. Well, see, this is really what the Gospels are for, as far as I can see. They were written for very ordinary people. The story is based in Judea, a very downtrodden province of the Roman Empire. And the people around the story of Jesus are very ordinary people, and they're rejecting the stories they've been given. They don't want the official stories of the Jewish temple, which is collaborating with the Romans, and is full of rich and powerful people. Or those are the ones running the temple. They don't want the pagan mythology either, of course. That's not their thing. They want to tell a story about themselves. So they tell a story about a nobody who becomes the ultimate somebody from this, podunk town in Nazareth, in upper Foggy Bottom. That's what the Galilee is. This is their story. So I think they'd be appalled to find that the story was, cut up and used by powerful institutions to promote their power agenda.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. We're going to get into all of that. What a great introduction to it. Just an underdog story of a kind of a kid from nowhere who becomes something. Like, what a great story. I want to read that story. All right, but just to back up for a moment and just like knock out some preliminaries. First of all, what is the original source material? Like, what language are you translating this from?
It's from ancient Greek,
Okay.
and the dialect is koine, meaning common. So this is a lingua franca spoken over quite a bit of the Roman Empire. It's a trade language. It's ordinary language. It's language of the street, but also the language in which the Hebrew Bible was translated
Mm-hmm.
for use all over the diaspora. So this is the scripture that Jews outside Judea are using.
Great. Okay. And also, just one other preliminary question. How long were you working on this? How long did it take you to do this translation?
Oh, yeah, I don't know, 3 years maybe.
Okay. Okay, great. All right. So, one of the things, I think it was in an introduction that you made to the work, or maybe it was an interview that I saw of yours. One of my favorite phrases that I've heard you use is, the Gospels are filled with, quote, primordial electricity. What a great, I mean, I want to like put a blurb that says that on the cover, right? Primordial electricity. So first of all, can you just explain, what do you mean that this book has primordial electricity in it?
Well, this book links the very, very ordinary with the eternal, the ultimate, um, with all meaning that there is in the universe, um, and it's just done in a very, very exciting and also artful way. Jesus is called not Son of Man. That's a very bad translation. He's the son of a human being, or as I translate, son of mankind,
Mm-hmm.
which is Hebrew. It's an old Hebrew phrase. It doesn't necessarily mean anything more than member of the species. It does not even
Mm-hmm.
specific for gender. This is a man or woman, a son of a human being. Um, um, but through Jewish scripture, especially in the book of Daniel, this phrase can be linked to the Messiah, the Savior who is coming to save this oppressed nation. And through the Gospels, through their narrative, this Messiah becomes the literal Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
And the Son of God, that's another phrase that is massaged and heightened. Um, Son of God is a honorific in Hebrew. It means in the Hebrew scripture, it means special servant of God. This meaning may have become quite general. You might be able to, you probably could tell, or could probably name someone who's very special, seemed very blessed as a son of God. But through this narrative, through the use of Greek reflecting Hebrew, this comes to mean the literal Son of God,
Mm-hmm.
which, of course, for pious Jews was a absolutely outrageous idea. They didn't do sons of God. Pagans, had gods, raping mortal women all over the place. So you had sons of God. The emperor was a son of God. That was fine. No, but pious Jews didn't contemplate this idea. But here, this idea was developed through the story.
Right. So I want to. There's another question I was going to ask you later, but I'll ask you now. Just on that note, you talk about in this work, in your introduction, you talk about how this was people need to remember how deeply provocative and revolutionary this text was, and how there was this kind of sense of, I think you used the word rage against the institutions of the time, the political institutions, the religious institutions. And this is a people who, as you say, wanted to hear their own story. I'm just wondering, like, How do you know when you're like reading the original the original Greek, like what is it in that text that is signaling to you that this was a deeply provocative work that was aimed at the institutions, written in a spirit of, it seems, enormous frustration? What in the work tells you that as a translator?
Okay, part of what tells me that is the way that um, Hebrew scripture is filtered through the gospel story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the citations are just all over. This Greek text is saturated with quotations from the Hebrew scripture, um, and the idea of the Messiah looks back to King David. So way back, 10th century or so, this was well, David and Solomon were the last monarchs of the state of the Jewish state, um, who were able to vindicate the state in power and independence. And things just went galley west after that. And with a one sort of recent disastrous, except for one recent disastrous interlude, when the Maccabees came in and were able to set up a short-lived rule, relatively short-lived rule. The Jews in Judea, they couldn't win for losing.
Mm-hmm.
They they were, you see, they lived in a strategic corridor, so they had powerful empires all around them, which just kept stomping through.
Right, right.
And um, it was just unbelievable chaos and oppression, and it just kept happening. They lost the first temple, Solomon's temple. They got a shiny new temple under, uh, this was under, um, well, it was King Herod, who was a Roman client king, gave it this fantastic renovation, and the renovation was barely finished before the Romans came in, and there was a Jewish rebellion, and the Romans, just flattened it in the year AD 70. And there's still nothing left but the ruins. You can see one wall standing, the so-called Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. So, yeah, the Jews clearly, had a feeling that they, in the ordinary political and strategic um, um, ways, were just not going to survive and not going to be heard, and not going to be able to save their precious civilization. Um, the only way they could do it was through words.
Mm.
So the
Yeah.
entire ancient world was very impressed with their scriptures. So the Gospels, the whole New Testament, leans on these scriptures quite heavily, and uses their prestige to make a new declaration of meaning, of purpose for the Jewish people, and to expand this meaning and purpose to everyone.
So, I mean, really, I mean, it's not only an underdog individual from nowhere, kind of within this society, but he's also an underdog civilization overall. He's kind of surrounded by far more powerful civilizations. So that puts it in a lot of context for me. Just one other thing, and then I think I will read one passage, and then we can talk about it. It's one of the most famous passages in the Bible that I want to read in a moment. But one other word that I've heard you use to describe the Gospels is, you say the Gospel writers were, quote, hilarious. And so, like, can you tell me, and like tell the people who are listening here who may not think of the Bible as hilarious, like, what did you mean by that?
Oh, okay. Well, it's I think you have to take a step back,
Yeah.
and think about the way ancient languages work, which is very different from the way our language languages work in the modern world. For us, these are they're just instrumental. They're tools for communication, especially for technical communication. So we want language to be quite plain and precise. And our expressive mode is images, really. We sort of think through pictures, through video, through consumer products. We're very visual. The ancients were not. This was a world of sound. So you didn't just talk, or you didn't just write.
Mm-hmm.
But talk, you read, you wrote at the same time. And importantly, people didn't, even when they were alone, they didn't read silently. They read out loud to themselves.
Right.
So these texts are just crammed with puns. They are clever. They are silly, all over the place. Um, so um, Jesus really can't open his mouth without being clever, without being funny. Example I really like is this, from the Sermon on the Mount. You are the salt of the earth. If the salt shall, traditional translation, lose its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? Well, and this is really on topic. This is thematic here. The word for losing its savor is actually dumbed down. The Greek word is dumbed down because the classical imagery of wit it has to do with salt. Very, very important imagery, especially for the Romans. And these gospels are being read all over the empire by people who never heard of Judea. Eventually, they're spreading very far. This keyword is salt. Salt is not only keenness, it's keenness of mind, it's wit, it's charm, it's all the things that you do when you open your mouth in society. And you don't just open your mouth to give information. You got to entertain people. Right. They demand it. You got to be cleverer than the next guy.
Right.
And so there's this competition, very fruitful competition going on all the time. People got to be smart, and that means you have salt. So when Jesus says, you salt of you got to be the salt of the earth. And that's a joke itself. You're not the salt of the sea, you're the salt of the earth, because that's where you live. You're standing on the ground right here. And Jews don't do a lot of sea voyaging, traditionally. They're people of the earth, farming, agriculture, herding right here. So, the salt losing its savor. If you lose your salt, you're in the Greek, literally, you're dumbed down.
Right.
So Jesus say, don't be an idiot, Right. And that's what he means when he keeps talking about hearing what you're told, seeing what you see, just being on a basic level smart. And I love this set of imagery. As a Quaker, I love it, because Quakers are very practical people, and people of practical invention, of commerce and science. And we kind of think, that practical morality is not separable from having your eyes open, knowing a trade, running your store, doing all these things in an honest and forthright way, which just basically means being alert.
I love it. I mean, that's an interpretation this is a great example of what's great about this translation, because that's an interpretation that I never would have thought of, and it's only opened up by your knowledge of languages. So that's wonderful. And before I get to this passage that I wanted to read, I mean, you talked a lot in this answer just now about the character of Jesus and how funny he is, and how important it was to be witty and smart and things like that in this context. This is really me putting on my kind of traditional literary critic hat that I wear not a critic, but just lover of literature that I have every week, where I want to understand the characters. And Jesus is such a famous character, maybe the most famous character to ever appear in any book. And he's so fascinating. He's wise, he's brave, he's comforting, he's militant, he's enigmatic, he's direct, he's evasive. He is just all these things wrapped up. And I guess my question to you about that is, was there something about the character of Jesus that you wanted to bring out in this work that you didn't see in other works? And another way to answer that question would be to fill in the blank on a sentence like this. Like, I just wish people really knew that Jesus was so blank, and which is not coming through in other translations.
Oh, well, I would just say complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is a very complicated character. You cannot listen to him and you cannot see him, much less his context from the flat surface of a standard translation, in which he's, one word in Greek is nearly always translated the same way in English. You can't do that. The shift, really the language shimmers and shifts as you go through it, and a word's meaning may change 3 times in a single passage. It's just like that. The very famous John chapter 3, and we talk about being born again. That's a joke. That's a pun. Being born, it doesn't mean just being born all over again. That's the misunderstanding. Nicodemus, a guy Jesus is talking to, mistakes that meaning. And Jesus really means, he deliberately tricks this guy, but the deeper meaning and the religious meaning is being born from above. And I take it, you have to kind of massage this a little. I translate as being born again straight from the top. taking it straight from the top. You have to find analogies in English in order to do some of this stuff.
Right.
But and Nicodemus sits there and, you got to be born all over again, go back in your mother's womb. What? He doesn't get it. And then Jesus, kind of lets that go, and this guy's never going to understand what he says. But Jesus is not done. He starts playing on other ideas. Pneuma is usually translated all over his spirit. But it really means breath or wind. So, in that chapter when he talks about, okay, the wind blows where it wants. That's the same word as spirit. Right? So he's going from, the supernatural into natural, which is a thing the Bible does all the time, but doesn't show unless you're careful. You can go from the supernatural to the natural and back again. And it's just sort of this flow of meaning. It's very, very beautiful as well. It's very clever.
Right.
But you have to trust your reader and show what's going on.
Right. Okay, so I want to move into just reading a passage. Now, this is a passage where Jesus actually doesn't speak, but this was such a great passage. It's one of the most iconic passages in the Bible. And my segue to this passage is that, you just said, what was the phrase you just used a moment ago? I forget what it was, but you used it. There's a kind of born again straight from the top. Right? So born again straight from the top, right? And that is something that's happening a lot in this translation. It is I think what I sense from you as the writer is a frustration in this language, which can be vague and can be translated in many different ways, is always kind of translated in the same way with a similar meaning. And you feel like, it felt to me that you're going to something that's a little bit more informal or slangy or even funny, just to like wake the reader up a little bit. They're like sort of like expecting this certain note to be played, and it's just a little bit different than usual, and it just wakes you up. And so this passage I'm going to read, which is from John 19, verses 1 to 5. This is a very famous passage where traditionally the crown of thorns is put on Jesus. He's being beaten by Pontius Pilate and kind of his goons and the others. And then Pontius Pilate says at the end, behold the man, as Jesus appears before the crowd. And that phrase, behold the man, is one of the most famous passages in the gospel. It's been Nietzsche named one of his books after it. I mean, it's just this phrase has been, read and reread so many times. And your rendering of this is just so interesting. And I felt like it's very characteristic of the translation overall. So here we go. So I'll read it, and then you can just tell us kind of what you were up to in this. This is John 19, verses 1-5. So at this point, Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers wove a garland out of thorny branches and put it on his head, and they draped a purple robe over him. And they came up to him saying, "Joy to you, King of the Jews." And they slapped him around. And Pilate came out again and said to the people, "Look, I'm bringing him out to you again to let you know that I don't find any guilt in him." So Jesus came outside again, wearing the thorny garland and the purple robe. And Pilate said, "Look at this guy." Now, I mean, there's a lot there, but just two things I'll point out right away is, like, number one, there isn't a crown of thorns per se. You call it a garland. There's millions of images in the world of Jesus with a crown of thorns, but you're not quite calling it that. And then, of course, there's, instead of behold the man, you have look at this guy. And so tell us what you're up to in this passage.
Yeah. Well, this you gotta translate flexibly. Well, little background. The vocabulary of ancient literary languages is teeny tiny. You have a few words, and each word tends to carry a lot of meanings. And the flexibility of meanings is part of the drama of the story or the speech, whatever you're doing. You've got to look at actually what's going on and look at how the meanings go sort of to more lofty and then to more lowly, slangy, because that's actually that has to do with the force, the momentum of the whole drama. So here we got Jesus, who is he had a according to two gospels, he had a very momentous mystical birth. He was a Messiah from the beginning, and then he gains fame. He works miracles. He gets a big following with his wise discourses, and then it starts to all come to pieces. Think of this as a film. Think of this as cinematic. It starts really abruptly to come to pieces with his betrayal and his arrest. Because once he falls into Roman hands, there is no hope at all. They're going to at least have to make an example of him. They don't arrest people. Rome's very practical. They don't arrest people to look like fools. Right. Even though, Pilate, and I could talk about him, a very interesting figure, both in literature here and in history. Pilate personally is showing he just doesn't want to do this. He doesn't want to go through with it. And it's a very anti-Semitic portrayal. He's shown as being forced to do it by the Jews. And anyway, Jesus is on this. He's plummeting downwards in a way that you think cannot possibly be halted, and it isn't halted until after his death. So, and this is played out in the vocabulary itself. He's the son of a human being, anthropos. He's also which is, and with this reference to the Messiah, and even, to something more than the Messiah, but he's also, he's an anthropos. He's a guy.
Yeah, is that what you mean by "look at this guy"? That's what you're trying to.
Yeah, it's the same word as for his, glorification, for him being more than human, son of a human being, makes him more than human. But then he's kind of subhuman here. He's um, a a clown. He's a convicted criminal. He's about to be tortured to death, and he's shown to the crowd at nearly the lowest point. Um, Pilate is trying to appeal to their humanity, saying, "Look at this guy. Just look at this. Don't you feel sorry for him? That's all that's left for him."
Mhm.
Jesus at this point is the possibility that someone will feel sorry for him, and the crowd doesn't.
Yeah. Another thing I noticed in that passage is, they say they slapped him around. I mean, I just thought it was like another like very subtle word choice. I mean, I think the traditional translation, you'll see like they smote him with his hands, which like sounds quite noble. It's like a kind of like a high noble sounding death, but they slapped this guy around. It does in its informality. It just brings Jesus way down to earth and shows him as this is like a very low kind of shameful, like low stature kind of thing that's happening right here.
Yeah. Now this draws on, this the Gospels are sort of drawing on literature we call subliterary, like farce, mime, um,
Oh, that's so interesting.
this all, all,
Yeah.
all kinds of this stuff. Probably early novels,
Mm-hmm.
which would be not extant yet or barely extant, because this is throwaway literature. But we get some of this literature later, and there's one from the mid second century AD that I've actually translated called The Golden Ass.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of slapstick, and what's really important is this precise depiction, like on the stage where you can see it, of how people are beating each other up. And
Mm-hmm.
you'd have different verbs for beating the child, an animal, a convicted criminal. Here the vocabulary gets really, minute. It's like, Inuit words. So the famous Inuit words for different kinds of snow, um, you
Right.
know, beating people up, you know, that's a that's a cultural specialty in
Right.
in the Roman Empire. So yeah, I had a very, as always, I had a very careful look at the dictionaries, at online sources, at pagan literature, and trying to see what the exact image was for this kind of blow. And I really think it was slapping around.
Right. I mean, the picture you're painting for me is that this is like, given the genres of the time, which would have influenced these works, like it almost sounds like a kind of like Charlie Chaplin kind of, I don't know, a
It is,
Groucho
it is,
Marx
it is.
kind of like thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, you have this in the parables too, like the parable of the banquet, where which is actually, for the time, it would have been funny, that this
Yeah.
this this powerful rich man, he can't get people to come to his party. Like, what about that? That's absurd in itself. So he brings in beggars and ordinary people, and then they don't behave, and then he throws them out and beats
Yeah.
beats the tar out of them. And this stuff is really kind of funny,
It's
or
sort of like a
was funny at the
stand-up bit
time. Yeah, yeah,
almost.
yeah, yeah. It's like Commedia dell'arte, or
Yeah.
all kinds of farce, like late night too. You
Hmm.
know, it's fairly it's earthy, it's violent, it's crude. Um,
Hmm.
it makes fun of all these class distinctions, um, and gender distinctions, and yeah, it's really kind of vivid, but you gotta translate it as what it is. You gotta
Yes.
trace where it comes from, what it's trying to express.
Yeah, I love this. So this is like sort of what I'm so glad we got to this moment in the interview, because like that's what's coming through in this translation, and like that right there is what I would truly love people to take away. This kind of thinking. I mean, like it is truly awful and horrific and cruel what's going on, but it's also slapsticky and funny. And there's like these like zingy one-liners, and it's just it's frankly it's great entertainment, is what it is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
So, all right. So, I and by the way, I've of course couched this in the sense of like, I realize we were being quite secular right now, but again, it's like we're also trying to have a fresh approach to this material. And so, all I'm saying is I say this with all due respect, but we're trying to find new ways to look at this material. We only have a few minutes left. Time has just flown by. I had a question from the audience that I wanted to ask, which is, what has the reaction been thus far, other than from your mother, from the readers? Characterize some of the reaction to this work.
Okay, it's still kind of early days, but yeah, people do seem to like the book. They do seem to agree with my mother that you can read it continuously. They like the footnotes, and the footnotes are in that the footnotes are short. They're very plain. They don't really
That's right.
interrupt the story. They just kind of add imagery, they add drama, they explain, why it's so important that this is happening the way it's happening. So I've gotten wonderful responses so far.
That is great. That is great. There's another question in here about your Quaker faith, that you're a Quaker. And that just dovetails into something I wanted to ask too. So I can just build on that and just say, I know you've described the Quaker faith as one of the most practical, the most practical religious movement in the world, and least theological movement. And you say that your work, I think you've said this broadly about your work, not just this work, but your other work too. You try to reflect Quaker values. Can you just, I realize you can't kind of explain all of what being a Quaker is, but specifically just tell us, how does that change your translation or inform your translations?
Well, Quakers are strict pacifists. We do not own or carry weapons. We do not serve in the military. We never have done. Being pacifists, you got to be a bit flexible about how you make an impression on the world. And so we are the friendly persuasion. We can't make anybody do anything. We don't really believe in the exercise of political power as such. Among ourselves, we don't even vote. That is, we can't do anything unless we have a complete consensus of everybody present.
Wow.
So persuasion is very important to us.
I see.
So I am used to, from the Quaker tradition, being very careful about what I say, about choice of words. You can imagine how helpful this is.
Sounds like this is a good profession for you.
Yes, to have this habit. No, that's the wrong word. That's an offensive word. We do not dare use it, in our community. No, we got to find another word. We got to say this exactly right, or we will not persuade anybody to even think about doing what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's wonderful.
This has been a good habit for me.
That's great. That's great. Okay, I had actually a follow-up question from the person who asked about the feedback to your work. So, to the extent that you're willing to share, the question would be, where have you gotten some real pushback? Has somebody really reacted strongly sort of against a choice that you made, if ever?
Yeah, there was one reviewer who didn't like what I think was kind of a hot dogging choice for me. Inauguration instead of beginning at the start of the book of John.
Right. It's the famous passage. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And you use the word inauguration there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And, I think I deserved that pushback. I think in the second edition, I'm maybe going to rethink that. I think it was a bit pretentious to use inauguration. And it's a really, the word for beginning means more than beginning. So I was trying to get at that maybe if you sound pretentious, then you failed. So maybe right. I gotta rethink that. And that's another thing that's that I get from Quakers that's helpful, is the stricture that you just gotta listen, not defend your own point of view to the last ditch, but right. Be open to other people's points of view and possibility that they're right and you're completely wrong. So uh, I then that was maybe a stricture that I deserved.
Okay. Great, great. All right, well, look, so we've come to the end of our time here, Sarah. This has been so terrific. I'm so happy you came on and did the show. And there's one final question that I ask of everybody who comes on, and I'd like to ask it to you. So just imagine that you have somebody who's the ideal reader for this book. Just who's kind of gets your entire project, knows just what you're up to, is loving it in just the way you hope it would be loved. Tell me, when this person gets to the end of your work and they close the book, what's the word or a phrase? What is the feeling that you've left them with?
Well, Mark, you have given me this wonderful interview, and you seem to be liking the book in all the ways that I intended. So I think I would turn that question back at you, and
You can't do
ask
that.
you what's your feeling. What would you want to feel at the end of this book?
Oh, that was just clever, Sarah. Boy, you turned it right around on me. Let me see. What did I feel at the end? I felt. Oh, what is the word? This is hard, but I have a few that I want to use. The word bracing comes to mind. The word provocative comes to mind. The word edgy comes to mind. Now these aren't really like the way I feel, but these are like sort of descriptions of the work. Having read a work that fits all those descriptors, I guess I would feel refreshed.
Wow, that's a lovely compliment. Thank you. I hope other readers have the same reaction.
I think they will. So Sarah, by the way, do you have a copy of the book just sort of lying around? Could you hold that up? All right, folks, this is it. I'm telling you what to do. Please go buy a copy of this. It is so interesting. And I just want to also say, like, you have this glossary of terms at the beginning, and you kind of discuss some of the biblical terms, and you're able to go in deeper about some of the choices you made and the kind of difficulty of what some of these words mean. And the introduction is terrific, and also written in your kind of characteristic style. I mean, frankly, I just feel like the price of admission, like just that glossary and the introduction, are worth it. So there's just so many great things about this book. You can dip in, you can dip out. So all of which is to give my ringing endorsement. Please buy Sarah Ruden's new translation of the Gospels. You won't regret it. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me.
Okay.